Dear family members and friends of First Lutheran Church, all of a sudden, there was a total silence in our gospel text for this coming weekend from Mark chapter 9, verses 30 through 37. Why? Well, because Jesus, the one whom his disciples called teacher, had asked, "Do you have something you'd like to share?" I mean, the disciples felt like they were little kids again, getting caught passing notes in elementary school. Now, it wasn't so much the passing of notes, however, that was so embarrassing, but the shame as to what was on those notes. For on them were scribbled 3 words: "Who's the greatest?" Now, some were writing Peter, who was the president of their little congregation of 12. Others wrote James, who was their head usher. Or still others wrote John, because he was the best looking and brightest, of course. But deep down, when they heard Jesus' questioning word, they knew better. You see, they were arguing about who was the greatest because they couldn't stand what Jesus had just said a few days before about his having to suffer and be killed, as recorded in Mark chapter 8, verse 31. Now, they just couldn't understand. They couldn't understand that if you are the Messiah, the Son of God, then why in the world would you have to suffer and be killed? Even Peter had been called Satan for trying to wrestle Jesus into the world's expectations of power and glory. And so the disciples tried to get away from the shock of it all by playing status games instead, like who's first, the best, the greatest. As someone who served as a hospital chaplain and parish pastor now for some 40 years, I know, and so do you, what this is like, with the shock and the trauma, trying to avoid the difficult reality of things. And when you're deathly afraid of something, you just don't ask. You talk about the weather or act like there's nothing wrong. Change the subject or something else instead. Or something that makes you feel bigger or stronger. And that's what the disciples were doing. And that's why Jesus had to sit them down and give them a leadership seminar on servanthood, right then and there. Whoever wants to be first, said Jesus, must be last of all and a servant of all. And then Jesus lifted up a little child into his arms and embraced the child in their midst. They wanted to know who was the greatest, right? So Jesus showed them. 26 inches tall, limited vocab, unemployed, 0 net worth. And then Jesus, the teacher, wrote this equation on their hearts and minds. Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives not only me, but the Father who has sent me. My friends, it's an amazing, divine equation. And I look forward to seeing you at worship this weekend so that you can hear God's word for you, what this divine equation means, and how you're a part of it. And so God's grace to you this day and always.